We're live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram. My name is Dustin Jones. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. It's Wednesday, so that means it's Jerry on Ice, where Christina Previtt or myself talk about all things older adults. It's Wednesday, Jerry on Ice. It's also Hump Day, so you likely have received the Hump Day Hustling email. 8:30 a.m. Jeff Moore sends that out. Hopefully you are enjoying that as we speak. But I want to talk about gold standard balance measures. All right, so this is a pretty interesting area of research, but then also clinical application. Good morning, Kelsey. How are we doing? That's something I think a lot about. We have some pretty amazing functional measures that are correlated to some pretty amazing outcomes and be able to identify folks that are at risk of functional decline or some type of fall. Jeff, good morning, sir. However, some of those things aren't perfect, and some of them are not that sensitive to change. And so it can be really challenging for us in the field of being able to identify falls risk, but then also to demonstrate progress and improvement. So there's some really interesting things that are coming out in the very near future that are already out now, honestly, that are really going to change how we assess folks, how we are demonstrating change, and really demonstrating our value in a way. So the big thing that I want us to start with is the concept of postural instability or postural sway. That, for a lot of people have said, that's kind of the gold standard in really assessing falls risk. However, to be able to objectively measure that, what do we need? We need a super expensive force plate. We need a controlled laboratory environment. That can be rather challenging to do for someone like a home health clinician, or you can spend a whole bunch of money and have something in your outpatient clinic potentially. But postural sway and being able to measure that is kind of the gold standard, a lot of researchers would say, but that's not very practical for us. I mean, just really reflect and think to yourself, how many of you all have actually measured postural sway? And then ask another question, how many of you all have reassessed postural sway to demonstrate any change or progress based on the interventions you provided? And I guarantee you most field clinicians are going to say, maybe I did that in PT school when I was following a professor that was doing a research study or in some type of lab. A lot of us out in the field are not necessarily leveraging this type of technology that's very valuable. We rely on functional measures. We talk about these a lot. The SPPB, the short physical performance battery, the modified CAT-SIB, the Berg balance score, the mini best test. A lot of these things are great. However, they may not necessarily be sensitive to change, and they're not perfect in identifying those that are at risk of a fall. And so the big question is, how can we bring some of these really pricey pieces of equipment that give you really helpful information into the field, into the folks that are in acute care, in the SNF, in outpatient, in home health? How can we bridge that gap? And so there's been some advances in some of this practical technology, one being accelerometers. So accelerometers that are measuring movement in 3 dimensions. We're able to basically tape those or fixate those to people's trunk. So a lot of times in the research, you'll see them taped maybe kind of, just around T10 or T12, something along those lines, or somewhere in the lumbar spine, or even taping it towards the front, maybe around their sternum, but basically strapping on these accelerometers to folks and then being able to assess, their postural sway. That requires another person typically for folks to do that, and they can be super expensive. So what can we do? You heard the word accelerometer. Many of y'all likely thought smartphones. We have that already. Accelerometers are found in our smartphone. That's a technology that's leveraged, to determine where your phone is in space. Good morning, Allie. And so we can potentially leverage that for measuring postural sway. I know many of you all, especially when we're talking about older adults, may think, smartphones. A lot of my patients don't have smartphones. And I would argue that is absolute garbage, especially when we look at some of the statistics. So these numbers I'm about to quote are from 2017. Think about 2017 compared to now, and even the rise in smartphone use in society with you, and then also with our patients. So these numbers, I can guarantee you, have only gone up. So as of 2017, 59% of adults 65 to 69 were using a smartphone. 49% of adults 70 to 74 were using a smartphone. Good morning, Nick. 31% of adults 75 to 79 were using a smartphone, and I will put a lot of money down that those numbers have only increased and will only continue to increase as well. But the big question is the smartphone, does it actually correlate to some of these gold standard measurements like using the force plate measuring postural sway? Can I take that cell phone and hold it to my chest and get similar data that I would if I was in a controlled laboratory setting with very expensive force plates? That's the big question. And the article that I want to discuss looked at just that, and it's one of the first of its kind to really compare those two. So this article is titled "Smartphone Technology Can Measure Postural Stability and Discriminate Falls Risk in Older Adults." Good morning, CrossFit Craig. This study was published in Gait and Posture in January 2019 from a group that was out of the University of Illinois. And so there were two main goals for this study. The investigation sought to determine if a smartphone can measure postural stability during progressive static balance tasks compared to posturography or those force plates like a lot of us are familiar with in older adults. And the second aim was to determine if a smartphone can discriminate between older adults at low risk of falling and high risk of falling. All right, so one to determine, can the smartphone say this person has a high risk of falls or a low risk of falls? So there were 30 older adults. The average age was 69 years old, give or take 8 years. And what they did is they established falls risk with the Physiological Profile Assessment, or the PPA. A lot of us out in the field have not necessarily used this, but this is a pretty solid assessment that can be leveraged if you have the equipment. So they measure a few things. They measure contrast sensitivity, basically with their vision of being able to tell the difference between light and dark, position sense or proprioception, muscular strength, leg extension basically is what they're looking at, reaction timing with a computer-based software and a mouse, and then postural sway, measuring someone's postural sway with something like a force plate, for example. So they took them through the PPA, and that's what established if they were at a high risk of falling or a low risk of falling. So they were able to categorize these folks, and then they took them through 7 static balance measures on the force plate, but then also while they were holding a smartphone right up against their chest, which is kind of standardized to measure postural sway. So they did those 7 static tests as they were holding the smartphone and as they were gathering data when they were standing on that force plate. So the 7 different positions that they were eyes open, eyes closed, eyes open dual task. They just added a cognitive component, eyes closed dual task. Then they did semi-tandem and then full tandem, and then they did single leg. All right, so those 7 positions, they tried to hold for 30 seconds each, holding the smartphone and then on a force plate. And let's see what happened as a result. How did those numbers compare? And so if you really want to geek out on the physics of this and the statistical analysis, I mean, it's pretty impressive in terms of some of the terminology that I learned way back when in physics, and then have forgotten many of them as I've gotten further along in practice. Some are pertinent, some are not, but it's a pretty interesting read. But I'm going to boil it down to you. Just basically what they were able to find is there's moderate to strong significant correlations between the measurement derived from that force plate and the measurement derived from the smartphone during these balance activities. And so the smartphone, based on their analysis, and 30 people, which is not huge, but it's a valid measure of postural stability, and it is also capable of distinguishing if folks are at high risk or if they're at low risk. So the smartphone measured up pretty darn good to this gold standard of the force plate, of posturography that is commonly used in a controlled laboratory environment. That's pretty awesome. That's super exciting for someone like me that, let's say I am doing the Berg balance score, for example, and I need to get maybe at least a 5-point difference to be able to show any meaningful change. And it can be tough to identify folks that are able to, make that jump or show progress. And so an objective measurement with the smartphone can do that. Nick asks, what is an app for the phone? So there's several apps. They're all, from what I've gathered, they're all based on the Apple platform, and I'm the only person on the face of this planet, I guess, that still has an Android. So there, if you read some of the research, they will drop the names, and I'm going to put links in the Facebook post so y'all can check that out. But there's a few different ones, and I would say they're not necessarily fully refined for clinical application yet. Some of them are kind of clunky when I've had my hands on them a couple times, but I'll put links in the Facebook post, Nick. You can check that out. So the clinical application piece, I want to think kind of day-to-day right now, how does this impact us, but also big picture and kind of where this technology can go. So obviously, balance assessment, the ability to measure postural sway. Nick's on Android. I hear you, man. I'm still there. The postural sway with a smartphone, holding at your chest, the objective balance measure that we can get is pretty amazing. To be able to get some of these numbers that are very, very pertinent for a lot of our patients, that is going to be valuable data. But then I think about the balance reassessment, that I can show that this measurement is going to be very, very sensitive to change, that I will be able to show change very, very easily with my patients. However, does that change? Is it clinically meaningful? That's the big thing that the research is going to continue to determine. How much change do we need in that reading from that smartphone? Do we need to get before that actually becomes meaningful in someone's day-to-day life and their falls risk? However, that is quickly coming, and a lot of that data can be inferred from some of the other research with posturography. So balance assessment and balance reassessment, demonstrating our value. This is going to be very sensitive to change. This is going to be very, very helpful. Now, big picture, think falls prevention. These phones can detect postural instability. And with the capabilities that are already built in, you could see a day where someone may have a notification to say, hey, let's check your balance. It's been 30 or 60 days since we did this. Run them through some of those measures where they're holding the smartphone right there. That app determines the values and determines if that person has a high or a low falls risk. And then it says, hey, your balance may be a little bit off. Let's go ahead and notify the doctor and schedule a follow-up visit. Or, hey, let's schedule a visit with your telehealth physical therapist and kind of see what's going on. These phones can detect early changes in performance, especially if we're able to regularly gather this data. Now, you have to have the cell phone kind of at your chest, but I think of, man, if we're able to just continually be tracking postural sway when, let's say, this phone is in their pocket, which I know that's kind of tough, just with the leg swing and whatnot. However, there may be a day where we're able to do that, which is absolutely amazing. But there's already tech that is kind of operating in this manner. I don't know if many of you all saw back in the summer, I came across an article that's talking about how Alexa, Amazon's, Alexa or Amazon Echo or whatever, is able to identify folks that may be in cardiac arrest. So there is some research that is basically allowing Amazon Echo to always be listening in the home and be able to pick up on some type of apical breathing, and will automatically start that care pathway to get EMS out there to really get the care pathway going if someone is in cardiac arrest. So that technology is already going towards always observing, always tracking data, and being able to initiate that care pathway. And I would not be surprised if shortly in the future that, postural instability, postural sway will be right in there. There may be a day where we have this at-home checkup app where you're able to, test reaction time. You're able to test vision. You're able to test blood pressure potentially with a piece of equipment that will be able to send that data. Test postural sway, always be listening for apical breathing if there's some type of cardiac arrest. And our technology's ability to observe how we're doing and to demonstrate trends could initiate a care pathway much, much sooner than if someone may be going to their 6-month PCP appointment, for example. So that's kind of big picture of what I'm thinking. This stuff has a lot of potential in early identification of a change in performance that can initiate those care pathways, which will ultimately lead, especially with postural instability, will lead them into our clinics or referral for us, hopefully. So that's where we're at, folks. I mean, this is coming up rather quickly. So if you're interested in that study, I know Manil asked about the study. I'm going to post the link on the Facebook video. So for the podcast listeners, for those on Instagram, go to the ICE Facebook page. Under that video, look for the title, Your Phone, the Gold Standard Balance Measure, and there's going to be a link to that study that you can look up. And then also I'll throw some links to the apps in there as well. So that's what I got, folks. Your phone, the gold standard balance measure. Your smartphone is a very powerful thing. We all know that, but I think clinically it's about to go to a whole nother level within the next few years, and this research is really showing that. So if you really want to geek out more about this type of assessment and some of the newer technologies and newer trends in research and how we can better serve older adults, I got to bring up Modern Management of the Older Adult Advanced Concept. So March 11th, we're starting that. Christina Previtt and I, it's 8 weeks online, 16 CEUs. You have had to have taken Modern Management of the Older Adult Essential Foundations. to be able to get into advanced concepts. The next group for essential foundations is January 8th. So 2020, January 8th. It's coming up pretty quick. You can hit that up and then you can get into advanced concepts on March 11th if you so choose. Also, check your email. Hump Day Hustling went out about 21 minutes ago, thanks to Jeff Moore. If you're not on that, just go to ptonice.com. You can sign up at the bottom, as well as check out all the other course offerings by the lovely Ice Physio family. But that's all I got today. Y'all have a good one, and I will talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.